Welcome to Through the Shadows, episode 2. I want to start by just asking you, did you look forward to taping the second episode? Was your week enjoyable? Before you tell us the details of the struggle to actually get the writing done, has this been something you look forward to doing, or start with that?
Yeah, I was excited about the recording. To summarize my events this week, yay, I made it.
Yeah, we both did it. That will give away at the very beginning. We accomplished the writing, though it didn't. It was dirty. It didn't look like we were gonna make it.
Yeah. If we were to pull the curtain aside, there was some last minute terror and suffering, and some changes to the plan, as it were. But here we are, and so I'm excited to see what you think. I'm excited to see how we will talk about these things and where we're gonna go from here. Like, there's a lot about it that's good now that we have it. So I'm excited overall.
Yeah.
I mean, how about you? Are you jittery with the excitement?
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot to say. The first thing is, I think in all of our years doing writing things, I don't think you've ever produced this much writing in a single week.
I don't know.
Maybe once or twice across the years we've had you hit that mark, but thinking about it and looking back, I really honestly I can't remember a time where you legitimately wrote half of a publishable, and publishable I mean in length, not necessarily that it isn't publishable, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Half of a short story in 1 week's time. I don't think you've ever achieved that before. So I feel like this is an occasion worth celebrating. For you, I think it was a bigger deal than for me. Especially at the graduate level, having to write that many words in a week was something that happened routinely, and as we noted before, I've had a little bit more success in being able to just eke out a few stories, but yeah. So I mean, this is the moment where I'm like, yes, I'm proud of you.
Oh, thanks, Danny.
Yeah.
In my education, I mean, you were there. It wasn't unusual to have a 5,000 word paper that we would cram out the night before. So like I have done it, but it's a little different when the course of it is so obvious and that the consequences are, I guess, more material. I'm not sure if that's even true.
Well, what I meant to say is, I think for most of the time that we were doing this, let's try and write stories and get together and talk about them, I feel like a lot of times our requirements were something like 1,500 words a week.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we were both falling very short, and then we would go for a 3 or 4 week period, and you might get up to 3,000 words, and then we would decide that there was some good enough reason to start over, or we would change the format or something, and so the stories never actually got finished. But here, in 1 week, you went from absolute zero. You had no idea what story you were going to write, not a single iota of information about what you were going to be doing, and now you have, half of the story is complete. It's done.
Yeah, nearly 4,000 words even.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So I wish I had one of those little. You know what I'm talking about, with
the party thing. Yeah.
Yes. So that's great. So let's jump into talking a little bit about I guess we would call it the mechanics or the routine sort of element of this project. I failed that utterly. I think as of the day before recording, I had 300 words of 3,750, and I think you had 2,000.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've got your text message. I could tell you exactly what day it was, because you even started updating me with just like I quickly figured out it wasn't even a full text. It was just a number of the words you currently had.
I hope that wasn't annoying, but
so basically today is Friday.
Yeah.
Yesterday at 2:20 in the afternoon, you said, I'm at 500. Here we go.
Yes. So
with an emphasis on all the O's.
Yeah. So in terms of, what did we say, 650 words a day or something, that just didn't happen. I just wasn't able to make myself do it. And I don't know if it was because I wasn't excited about the story or if I was afraid of the work. I don't know. But I guess I would call it like a sledgehammer that finally just kind of broke through the sheet of ice or whatever and got me to just sit down and write this thing was the accountability. And unfortunately, I don't know how, if you're watching this, I don't know how you can recreate this level of accountability necessarily, because just having a friend or something where you can weasel out of a commitment once a week, like, oh, we're going to get together and have a phone conversation, that wasn't enough for us. But for me, it turned out that what was enough was that we had a show we were going to record, and I care about our YouTube project, and so I leveraged something new that was important to me into, smashing it into that old problem of not being able to produce creatively. And it fucking worked.
I know you and I have both, I shouldn't say done a substantive amount, but we've both looked into motivation and ways to motivate oneself and so forth. And I know I've run into a lot of systems where they'll talk about either it's they'll phrase it as accountability or they'll phrase it as incentivizing, or in some way you have to make it so that it is worth it to you to not fail. And so at least this week, as you put it, the YouTube project, that was the thing that it made it worth it for me also to not fail. Hopefully that we maintain that, because I mean this is awesome.
Yeah, because normally what would have occurred was it would have been the day before, and I would have been at 500 words, and I would have made a piecemeal effort, and I would have got to 1,500, maybe 2,000, and then I would have said, fuck it, good enough. And maybe we would have texted back and forth and joked about it, and naughty you and slap of the wrist type joking, and that would essentially be it. And then we would just massage each other's ego for a couple hours about what we had written, and there'd be little accountability. Whereas this time, I guess it clicked it over. It wasn't an optional task. It was like I woke up this morning and realized, oh, my day off, where normally I sit and practice guitar for 4 to 6 hours, is one of my favorite things to do. I don't get to do that because I have to finish this story right now, and I didn't enjoy that. I didn't like that, but it's what I've wanted. I want the ability to make the writing a priority that trumps other shit, and this did it. So, haha.
Well, I mean, what's interesting is there was something, and this is something I still struggle with. All throughout the week, I can't really pinpoint a specific reason why I didn't write every day. Every day there seemed to be a new reason.
Well, tell the people, what was your experience the same? Where we talked about you were at 2,000 words about when I was at 500, right up at almost at the deadline, and we, I did technically fail, and so did you. We failed the agreed upon finish time for, we wanted everything to be turned in at midnight the day before we wanted to record the next episode, and neither one of us accomplished that.
Yeah.
Or no, you didn't. You finished at 5 this morning.
Yep.
And I finished at 11:30 this morning.
Exactly. So yeah, as far as the deadline, total failure. As far as the writing every day, total failure. But for me, I did do a little bit of writing. I got up to about 2,000 words. And then.
Well, but how did it shape out? Did you just blow it off for 2 or 3 days, or did you write each day? What did you do?
I think it was Sunday I wrote, and then Monday or Tuesday, I don't remember. And so I got up to the 2,000 because essentially there were 2 instances of, I have to sit down and force myself to write. And so I spent several hours on 2 days where I got up to that point. And then the remaining days of the week, there was always some reason or some thing where I'm still suffering from, I want to write, but I don't force myself to do it, and I'll procrastinate, and it becomes this sort of anxiety thing where I don't really want to do it, and so I push it off, and I find other things that at the time feel more important. So then there I am at Thursday at 9:30 on the phone with you saying, yeah, I'm sitting down to write right now. I still didn't even get started until 10:30-ish. I'm not even sure, but it was later than when we talked.
Yeah, I mean, let's try and avoid using day of the week names because
Yeah.
they're not going to be seeing this on the same. Well, I guess if I upload these on Fridays, then it'll make sense. But yeah, so Thursday in this case is the day before recording.
Yeah. I guess in this specific instance, I feel like it made sense to give the context. Of, like,
yeah,
today,
for
right
sure.
now is Friday.
I just want to make sure we don't confuse people where they're like, okay, what reference point is that? So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, last night was we I didn't even start until 10:30, 11ish from the 2,000 word point, and then I did the thing that I've been guilty of doing for years, where I was like, okay, the first chunk of this didn't do anything at all that I wanted it to do, and so I edited it a little bit.
Oh.
But then the awesome thing that came out of that is it was like, oh, now I know exactly where I'm going with this. And so then I just continued writing until 5 a.m. when I was finally finished. But the problem that created is that from about 3 on, I would like fall asleep at the keyboard. Or, I had to there were a couple of different times where I wanted to use a word, but I wanted to make sure it was the correct word. So I had to go Google it or do a little research.
Okay.
And then I'd wake up like with my hands on the keyboard, like, dozed off. And so if I had done it sequentially every night and just done a bit every night, knowing where I was going, would have been way easier. And I would have actually been able to sleep and so forth.
That's a lot of what I think we're doing here is we know that if we just set aside a half hour to an hour a day as our writing time, that it will reduce our stress, increase our output, the quality of the work is going to be better. All of those things are true. Excuse me. All of those things are true. We know them to be true. It's just that we can't convince ourselves to actually do it that way because it feels like a chore, and it's so easy with how many things both of us have going on in our lives to just refuse to have there be an additional chore.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side of that, the positive half is that after 5 a.m., I slept for a little bit, got up, went to work, did the work thing, and like I won't say I was proud necessarily, but I was glad that I had put the work in. Like,
well, maybe not proud of like the staying up until 5 and it being, not the best time management strategy for an adult type situation. Yeah. Like, I get that part of it, but no, I think there's you did the thing. You sacrificed for the art.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm without giving anything away, I think I think we can say without it giving away too much of what I'm going to say about the piece later, I think it paid off. So yeah, my experience was pretty similar in that one of the early days in the week, I wrote a 4-line poem that I was quite happy with, and then I think a blurb of like I said, about 300 words, and then from that point, which was day 1, maybe day 2, all the way until day 6 or 7, so 4 days or whatever in between, I just did nothing, or I would literally write a sentence or two, such that by the time the last day came, as you saw with the text message, I had like 500 words. So I guess so that we can move on to the next topic. I think our goal going forward should maybe be to try and take baby steps. So we both know that our instinct is to try and write something the day after the show or within the first couple days because we just feel obligated. So maybe what we should do is try and increase that so that instead of just writing one day at the beginning and then the last day or two at the end, maybe increase it to where we try and write 2 days at the beginning at least. Have a bigger chunk of it done at the beginning so that even if we do end up butting against the end of the week, it's not, in my case, it was I have to write 3,500 words, and in your case, it was I have to write almost 2,000. I think that's our goal. I don't know if we want to say, like, next week we're just going to fucking do it and write every day. But maybe the goal for me, at least, is I want to, at the beginning of the week, add an additional day where I write a 300 to 500 chunk so that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And for me to keep an eye towards the reproducibility of our writing system here. What lesson do you think you learned this week, as it were? I mean, it's our first week, it's early on, so maybe there won't be much, but like, did you learn something aside from, hey, I need to do it every day, or something about the process that was...
About the process, not about the narrative?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me think about that for a second.
Because for me, one of the
share yours, and I'll see if I can come up with something.
One of the realizations I had is that before I actually sit down to put words on paper, I have to have a better idea of where I'm going. Because I know the first couple of nights where I did write, I just spent a lot of time just staring at the screen because I didn't know what to do. So the process for me is, I think, I essentially skipped over the actual outlining or the actual thinking about what the idea was going to be. Because I took that prompt and I assumed, oh, that should be good enough. And I just kind of mulled on it, and I didn't actually try to literally document the idea and write it out. So I want to try and, tonight or tomorrow morning, I'm actually going to try and spend about an hour or so literally writing out something, so I'll have a better
outline,
a better vision, a better goal of where I'm heading, as opposed to just going, yeah, this prompt will work, and I have an idea of where it's going to go.
So, to set up the our differing perspectives here, my goal is to standardize my writing, which you were better at that than I was, so it makes sense that my main goal for next week is to spread out my writing more evenly across the week. Your goal is you're going to try and front load a little bit more pre-planning, outlining, so as to make your the process when you're actually sitting down and writing, you're finding a large benefit from having a very clear idea of exactly what your task is at the keyboard.
Yep. And for me, I think that also has the advantage of it makes it easier to then sit down and actually do the writing. Because I know that was part of the anxiety sometimes, is it's like, well, now what, so.
All right, so I guess I did come up with a couple things to say. So the first thing that I'll share is I didn't know how within reach 3,000 to 4,000 words of writing per day was until this week, because in just a 3-hour span, I basically wrote the whole half of the story. So if I really wanted to, and I mean, I went on today, I wrote the whole story, the whole half of the story, basically. And then I had a full day of doing all the regular shit that I do. We're not being paid for this. Like, this isn't our jobs. This isn't, we both have other obligations and lives that we go and do in the world. So I went and did all of that. If I just actually had a 6 to 8 hour period where I made myself like, this is what you're doing right now is you're writing, I think I could just write the whole fucking story in one day. And that's pretty empowering. And the other thing I noticed was it didn't seem a whole lot, we'll save your response to this for the next part, but it didn't seem a whole lot more drafty to me than most of the shit I write. I'm all over the spectrum generally anyway, so it seemed like it flowed about the same as it normally does. So I guess if I said like there was a lesson, it was that I was underestimating my ability to produce in a short amount of time, and I didn't have the benefit of any real outline. I do one of the things that I do is I help my mother with her business, and sometimes while I'm doing that, I will listen to music and just kind of sit there for an hour or two where I can just think. And I use that time often to daydream and play act in my brain. So when I'm not a super Jedi wizard monster guy living out my own fantasies, I occasionally do, work on my story ideas. And so that was essentially all I did was I spent some time listening to power metal and sort of spitballing ideas in my brain about what the scenes might look like. But then when it came down to the time to write, I found the process of like, you don't have a choice. I have to finish this story by 11:30 a.m. because I have other shit to do. And you fucking were up until 5 a.m. You did the work. And I had to get it done, and fucking it came out, and so I find that very empowering.
Yeah. I had kind of a converse to you in that I always have this delusion that like, oh, I can just pound out the words. And between the two of us, I've always been the slower writer, even academic writing or whatever. So I always have this impression of, oh yeah, I can write 1,000 words an hour. I was really averaging more like 500 an hour or less. And so I have to keep that in mind when I'm doing my planning. Whereas it sounds to me like it might be easier for you to produce more on, if you're doing it every day, it might be easier for you to produce more on any given day than it would be for me.
Yeah, and it's worth, I think, noting too that I would say pretty much on most metrics that you would use, I mean, academically, I think often you got better grades than I did until graduate school. I got my shit together, but and if I remember correctly, we were both in the same percentile for a lot of the standardized tests, and I think you scored higher than I did on the ACT. So it's not that I'm twice as smart as Michael, and so I can write 1,000 words an hour and he only writes 500. It's worth noting, if you're watching, that you could be anywhere in that spectrum, or you could write more than I can in an hour or less than Michael can, and that that's not necessarily a bad or good thing. It's just that in my case, maybe it's a bonus because I can get away with a little bit more shit than you can, maybe, but I mean, we'll see. Maybe my story sucks compared to yours. So
or maybe that'll turn into a crutch where
yeah, exactly, where I can, and this is the way I've done things. I am big on procrastinate, and then I just shit everything out at the last minute, and I've always gotten good grades as a result of that, and it was always reinforced. And I know it's bad.
Yeah, I was always that kid that I wouldn't even start my homework until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, and then I'd be up till stupid in the morning doing homework, and then get no sleep and try to go to school. And yeah, it's like I've always been a procrastinator. I think you were definitely more successful at it than I was in that respect.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode about academic writing. Like maybe that's something we could look into and read. You know, let us know in the comments if you're watching this and that sounds interesting. Would you like us to do an episode where we just talk about the difference, our different lives, so to speak, as academic writers as opposed to fledgling creative writers? Because while I can't claim any real success with creative writing, I've spent a lot of time writing at a pretty high level academically. And
it's interesting because I could be something of a foil for that because I had the ultimate fail.
Yeah, we could tell that story too. So there's some good stories we could share. It would mostly be a jerk-off fest for us because I would love to sit and talk about college for for an hour or whatever. But fuck, if people actually want to hear it, that'd be awesome, and we'll do that. So anyway,
I wanted to jump in really quick, come back to a previous point, just hit it real fast and move on. I know neither of us ever outlined, did drafts, anything all through school, creative writing, academic writing, you name it. I hated it. And I think I'm learning now, like those were skills I should have practiced and should have been doing.
Oh yeah.
The outlines help, the drafting. I just kept in my mind, like, don't edit, just smash it out, keep going. If it's 4 a.m, I want to go to bed, just put the words on the page. Revision is my friend. And I never did that in the past. I was always so focused on I have to get it right the first time because then I got to turn it in an hour.
Yeah. So especially if you're a young person in your teens or early 20s or something, an undergrad or maybe even in high school, and you stumble upon this video, that's, I feel old. That's some advice I can give you younger kids is just fucking outline. I hate it, but it's outlining is so good. It's so good.
Back in my day, Sonny.
Yeah, that's uphill both ways. Okay, so I think that's pretty solid for sort of talking about our week in trying to pretend to be writers. We sort of both fell into the trap of procrastinating, but due to the weight of the obligation of this show, you, our non-existent viewers, pushed us forward, and we shattered the fucking ceiling and broke through. Hiya! Yeah.
Yeah.
I really wanted to do the bia, but I will resist the urge. So, I guess what we'll do now is move into the second part of tonight's festivities and go into a summary of what we actually did. I think the way we should do it is tell the prompt that you selected, so that in case people have forgotten, or if they're just coming in on this first episode as their first episode. Tell which prompt you did, and then give us a real quick rundown of the story that you actually told, and then I will respond, and then we'll see where the discussion goes, and then we'll do the same for mine. All right, so tell us what prompt you went with, and then I have a quotation that I'll share, and then you can give a synopsis of your piece, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so the prompt, yours was a little more broad. I think the way you put it was an employee in a robot factory or an AI plant or something like that.
Like a weapons manufacturing deal or something like that.
Manufacturing. So I kind of took that and ran. And do you want to go to the quote, or should I?
Yeah. I'll read out a quote here. My favorite quote of the week is the first paragraph.
A small dancing flame whispered her shadow into existence on the floor. She paused for a moment, as was her personal custom, to watch it for a heartbeat. The light brought a sort of life to her shadow, like an ethereal double that moved in tune to the silent music of the fire. Turning towards the candle in the alcove, she closed her eyes and bowed her head. Eventually she straightened and dipped 2 fingers into the small warm pool of wax that had begun to gather beneath the wick. Carefully, she traced the sign of light onto the back of each hand with the practiced efficiency of ritual.
So, from there, tell us where you went.
Yeah, from there, she basically starts her day and logs into her computer, and I'm trying to establish this idea that my main character here, her name is Sophie, that she is something like a maintenance technician or something. So I kind of talk about the workshop, and I'm trying to show that, as opposed to just giving her this title of, I'm a maintenance tech. She logs into her computer and she summons forth this holographic AI that I named Gavin.
So let me jump in. When you wrote that first paragraph and you decided to sort of lead with a ritualistic, spiritual, religious type idea, two questions. Did that make it easier for you to write more? And then was the purpose of that specifically because you wanted to create depth of character from the outset? You mentioned at the beginning that your focus was on trying to. And anyway, I've said enough. I asked the 2 questions. Go ahead and respond to that.
Yeah, I was trying to focus on the characters and their relationship. The idea actually started from other sci-fi books that I've read recently, in fact, have these characters that have these ritualistic religions. Anne Leckie wrote the what is it called? I have it on my bookshelf. Anyway, Sword of Justice? Ancillary
Justice.
That's what it was called, by Anne Leckie. And
even though we couldn't remember the name, if you haven't read it, turn us off and go read it. Killer book.
Yeah,
great book.
It won like all the awards.
Yeah,
so.
We loved it. In fact, we read it in an earlier permutation of our book club, which you should be able to go watch the first episode of that right now. It should be available. Random plug in the middle of the show.
Well, I only brought it up because her character has this thing where the characters always wear gloves, and there's all these shrines.
Yeah.
Sort of
no, I definitely could tell that you were channeling that here.
Yeah, and I've seen that a couple other times, and I thought, I personally like that. I like that idea, that ritual. So I wanted to have a character that had that also. And for me, I think it also leaves things open to. It implies a culture and a society outside of this character that has more depth and more questions that you can jump off of later.
Yeah, so maybe that could be our first. We need a graphic that's like bit of advice that comes over. I would say that's a cool takeaway. I think from your first effort here is you started off tactically by adding a specifically cultural. In this case, it was religious, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be some kind of a cultural element that immediately tells the reader that this is a nuanced character that has a life that extends beyond the story that you are about to read. That that existed before this story was told to you. I think that's great. So let's, in the interest of moving it along, then go on with the synopsis. Then, so you begin with this wonderful paragraph, and then you show us tell us the names of the characters again.
The main protagonist, her name is Sophie, and
Sophie.
then the AI that I chose to create is Gavin. The Sophie, the name, I thought it was ironic because there's actually a Japanese AI type robot they're creating that they named Sophie. And then Gavin was, if I remember right, it's Gaelic for fire, or it's related to that or something. I tried to be tactical about the names as well, is really the point. So I think I was just referencing my notes here again. From there, I started with this sort of, she calls forth Gavin and they have this kind of small talk. It's the beginning of the day. I'm trying to show that this isn't the first time that they've met, but they're not necessarily like the closest, bestest of buddies. So I wanted there to be a conversation that was kind of playful and showed that connection, but also wasn't very intimate or very, I don't know what the word is, but
I saw it as detached and mockingly playful.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the type of thing I would think most people would have with a coworker, but not necessarily with their best friend.
Yeah, I can see that.
So that was kind of my goal. From there, she goes about she's trying to get about her work day, and she talks to him and says, "Hey, play me some music." And he happens to play a piano concerto from Chopin, and I do a fun little scene where he's directing it, and I tried to make it artsy because, yay, art. And it blows her away because she wasn't expecting it. And so it becomes obvious that he has recently gained access to a database that the more she thinks about it and the more they talk about it, she realizes maybe he's not supposed to have access to this database. And so I'm hoping that plays in towards the middle and the end of the story.
And was this a database she had given him access to?
No, because I also said somewhere in the beginning that he is an R&D project at this company, at this factory, so that essentially it was something that the researchers had given him to digest over the weekend. I try to hint at, I don't know how successful I am, I try to hint at that when she initially discovered him, she links him to her computer and her, profile essentially. And so I'm thinking something along the lines of like, she has a broader general access to the computer systems, which he wasn't supposed to have. And so I'm thinking that connection gives him access to things that the researchers who are creating him didn't expect. And right. From that access, I want to hopefully show that he grows as a character from this exposure to this artistic database.
Right. So that's essentially what I just asked. So maybe I'm being dense here. So back me up again. She gave him access to the art, not the research.
Unintentionally.
Unintentionally, but it was her actions that lead. Basically, what you're setting up here is an R&D AI project that is meant to have access only to raw scientific information that is being strictly controlled by a research team. And it's not supposed to have access to the general databases and culture centers of this asteroid a mining space station type situation?
Yeah, I'm intentionally vague there, but yeah.
But she does this sort of what she thinks is a minor act of altruism and sort of uncages him. I loved that part where you talk about how she views the way that she immediately, you begin to analyze the way that the research team treats the AI, turning him off and turning him on, things like that. And so this act of altruism that she does where she gives him what to her is this toss away access to general information, you're setting up a situation where it's this access to art that is what makes him human, or what makes him more complex. And so go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, and I was also hoping to kind of imply that the interplay exists of not just that he had the art, but that also she allows him a freedom of movement and a freedom that he wasn't getting to then discuss this art with her and work with it in a way that isn't isolated and cut off from everything. And they grow together as a result, I hope. I don't know if I was very successful in showing that.
Well, what happens next?
After that, ultimately, they have a discussion about philosophy. She's thinking about, as they discuss this database, is his understanding of it a true understanding, or is it a mechanical, programmatic, retelling of the information that
Specifically
maybe
the art information.
Yeah, exactly. Specifically that. Is it just an extrapolation in a mechanical fashion, as one would expect of a very good computer, or is he actually understanding it and feeling it? Does he feel? Does he not feel?
Yeah.
And so there's this chunk of that sort of meditation, and then it's followed with, he asks her, why does she pray? Why does she have this ritual? And they kind of push on that, and they get into a discussion of what I would call ontology. What is the meaning of his existence or her existence, and what is it to be alive? Where he concludes, I think life is more complex. I am alive. Like I want to be alive. I want to do more. Then from there,
you do a whole section where he talks about, where they both talk about what it means to actually be alive, and I thought it was quite good for, especially considering that what we had talked about before about the strictures of that we had both Omega failed the timeline and had to just kind of shit this out.
Yeah.
I was pleased to see that even in your rush to get through that there was at least there were some footholds for nuance that we could add in the editing process.
Yeah.
So
I was trying to just kind of essentially provide the bare bones, because I kept having to like a mantra tell myself, revision is my friend. Revision is my friend. Like I can come back
Yeah.
and make it awesome.
Okay, so now tell us, where do you conclude for this first chunk?
For this chunker, it was basically, I conclude in the beginning of what I think of as Act 2. She gets called into this supervisor's office, and I'm implying in that section that between the time that she's in the supervisor's office and the last conversation she had with Gavin,
Which the last conversation she had with Gavin, he drops the bomb and says, I think they're going to kill me.
Yeah, I forgot about that. But yeah, he's
That's
essentially
why
saying,
I'm here.
Yeah, he's basically saying, like, I want to live, and I'm afraid I'm going to die. And then I do like a jump cut essentially to this scene where she's in the principal's office basically.
Which it was a little jarring for me, because the I think they're going to kill me line was very powerful, and then I only get like a little chunk of the next part. But I think once the story is finished, it'll flow together, and yeah. So anyway, she gets called into the office, and then what?
And then I think it's just she kind of. I try to make it so that she's implying that there's been a period of time between that statement and now, where I hope I convey this idea that they've created a plan, as it were, that happened off stage, so that I don't have to go to all the hassle and the trouble of actually typing out them brainstorming, what can we do, how do we help you, so that it'll give that impression when you're reading the story, you'll pick up on, they already planned it out, so it'll feel like it was, this master plan and yada yada, whereas I think if I actually detailed the brainstorming and so forth, it just makes it tedious, and it's going to ruin the surprise of actually carrying out the plan.
No, I agree. And so that's where you end, right? Is sort of on this note.
Yeah.
And so I'll jump in then, and I'll say, I don't want this to be an exercise where we basically just talk about how the good things about each other's writing. I think we're going to need to get into what elements of narratives work and what don't. But given that this is our first attempt, and the main focus was trying to get the stuff on the page and have half of a story to talk about, I would say this is on par with any of your best work that you've done in any of our other projects over time.
Wow.
And for me, that was a big surprise, because I anticipated, especially when you told me you were up at 5 a.m., I figured it was going to be hot garbage. And it wasn't, generally speaking. There were some things that we might have gotten stuck on editing-wise before, if we were talking about this in the frame of the way we used to do this. But as we've decided, the goal here is we can't edit it until we have the thing. So that's where I want to start. And then, but what the big triumph, I think, with this piece is that you ingest, how long is that last chunk? Maybe 700 words or something. So like the part one is like 3,000 words.
Yeah.
And in that time, you take us from knowing nothing, and you give us this character of Sophia.
Yes.
And
I just call her Sophie. But,
Sophie. And you develop her relationship with this AI all the way from maybe they're kind of friends, but he's sort of a dick, a show-off kind of attitude, all the way up to they're in a very intimate friendship where he's saying, like, I need you to save me. And then when you jump forward and they already have the plan for his escape, it solidifies that relationship in a way that I think is very productive. And it read easily. I had no trouble going through. There were some... this will be the first use of a term that I believe is of our invention. The first paragraph is very poetic. Which is that's our bullshit term for when we feel like the act of writing prose and poetry combined, so you get proetics. And so in general, I would call this a very solid effort. And so then this is our first time doing this. So where should we go from here? Do we want to just talk about what you're going to write for next week now, and then do all of my story at the same time? Like have part 2 is your story and then part 3 is my story? Or do we want to banter back and forth about yours for a little bit more and then go to mine and then come back at the end and do what is Mike going to write next week? What's Tony going to write next week?
Yeah, I think the best way is the end should just be both of us saying, here's what I'm going to write next week.
Okay, okay. So... comments wise, then I don't want to belabor it too much, but like I said, I think if we keep this up, I think there's a lot of because clearly you have something that you want to say with this piece. So I mean, is there anything else that you want to highlight for the viewers in terms of the narrative or your thoughts or whatever?
In the past, one of the things I've struggled with is this idea that I really have to convey this philosophy, or I really have to convey this, super important meaning. And this time, I was just really not focused on that at all. I was trying to just tell the story, but it turns out, in doing so, I stumbled into a couple of moments where it's like, no, I think this is an important meaning of this story, and so I guess it was nice to see that sort of came out naturally.
Well, and here's a topic that I was on the fence about whether I was even going to bring it up, but I've decided that cast aside the fear and open the door to all the different spheres of our writing universe. One thing that I did notice was that both of us tapped into the body of intellectual sort of work that we have hanging in the background of all this in a way that I did not expect. So your use of a concept that I believe was my invention that we then added to the sort of shared universe was the Soulfire. And so I was surprised to see you utilize that in the first story. And then I found myself also reaching into my bag of tricks in a way that I hadn't anticipated doing for this project. And I think that speaks to the degree to which at first we thought that this was going to be, I thought I was going to have to write strictly just comedy, or I thought that with the trying to push myself to write that many words that I was going to have to really just lean on the crutches, and it was going to be very slow going in terms of being able to tell a story that I was happy with. And that wasn't the case. And so I felt much more confident, like I should bring in some of these concepts that are more guarded. That I think are better ideas, because when else am I going to use them?
And I think for me, speaking to, say, perhaps another struggling writer or whatever, the big takeaway for the week for me ultimately was just get the words on the paper and push through. Don't focus on any other goal. Don't focus on the meaning or how good the prose is or any of that, because those are all stumbling blocks I've had in the past. And here I just kept looking at the clock, going, "Oh my God, I just want to go to bed, but I have to get to the end." And that was a real push where I just stopped worrying about, is this a good sentence or not? Is this conveying the meaning I want? And I'm pretty surprised it worked out well. I don't know how much of a struggle yours was, but as a transition here, ultimately, yeah, I didn't see anything in yours. I don't know if you felt like it didn't come off well or what have you, but I didn't read anything that felt like, oh, I just got to smash crap on the page and run.
No, I didn't get that from yours either, really. Now, full disclosure, I would not label either of these things as... It's not the highest pinnacle of writing that either one of us has done.
Yeah.
But given the spectrum of quality from our previous work, so not necessarily compared to other writers, but for the two of us in the past, the experience we have writing for each other, I would say that this was in the top 30% area, and I thought it was going to be in the bottom 50% in terms of quality.
I kept telling you, Mike, be prepared, dude. This is going to be a hot fire trash.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I wasn't thinking that it was going to be the worst thing you had ever written or that I had ever written, but I expected us to kind of have to do a lot of just shoulder shrugs, like, yeah, sorry, it's crap. And no, I don't really feel compelled to do that. I think if I was to go back through, I'm sure there's some shit that I would add, and there's probably some times where I use the same word too close together, or others, dumb shit that it doesn't seem to matter how much you write. You don't ever stop doing that. You just have to edit it out later. So,
and for me, that's the exciting future of this, is that maybe you and I will come back to these 6 months from now or something and revise and edit them and polish them into something that we could submit to publishing.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Now that I've actually spent a little time with this story and with your story, both of these I could totally see being published in a short fiction, work. Be it what's the one that you were subscribed to for a while, where it's a monthly, they ship them out to people's doors, and it's just a short fiction collection. Both of these I feel like would totally fit in there.
I don't know. I mean, I subscribe to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction.
That was the one.
But that's the big leagues.
Yeah.
As far as I know, that's the
premiere. Yeah, I don't know that we're gonna get in that one right away.
No, probably not.
But I feel like I've invested enough into either of these, in the writing of my own or the reading of yours, that I think these are stories that could fit in there. That was kind of my point.
I like I said, well, let's move on from that because it's getting a little bit, So before we move away from your story and get into mine, the last thing that I will note about yours is, let's see. I'm just going to rudely flip through it on screen. I just don't care if people can watch. If they're this far into it, I'm assuming they're just going to watch the whole episode. So,
well, we can hope, yeah.
Well, I mean, if they're going to quit watching because I flip some pages just to, I want to give your story what it's due.
Yes.
Yeah. Like here, I'm going to read I'm not going to put it up on the screen or anything. I'm just going to read a 2-line passage here that I think has an error in it, but it doesn't matter because it still ends up being okay. Gavin knew anything, but he could never be moved to understand something new. He would never have an epiphany and could never experience the revelation of a new truth outside the scope of his databases. Nom nom nom. That was another line that I think is worth. Again, it needs to be revised, but that's not the point here. The concept that you're getting across, I like this idea, especially the end where he could never experience the revelation of a new truth outside the scope of his databases. I mean, that's exactly, for me, that's exactly the type of thoughts that I would expect to have come from somebody who's plugged into the sci-fi idea. This is for my money, from an academic perspective, these types of thoughts are very academic sci-fi. And so I was glad to see that in the prose. And so, yeah, when we come back at the end, I have a few ideas for where you could go with this. But yeah, I mean, I guess you have to get like the full. I'm hitting guitars over here. Sorry. You have to receive the full 9 out of 9 Amberites this week because of the struggle and then the necessity of like putting your fingers in your throat and puking this onto the page and having it still have a certain degree of quality, I think is, again, on the spectrum of our work, knowing each other, not compared to other authors. We're not sitting here trying to say that these are great stories compared to the Lord of the Rings. We're talking about, you know, our own work and our own experiences. And so for you as the listener, already you should be saying, if I want to be a writer and I'm having trouble, you know, just producing work, if you can just force it a little bit, I'm starting to think that maybe this is the fucking ticket. So, setting that aside, we'll move into my story.
Yeah, I was gonna say on that note. So what? Tell us again what prompt you decided on.
So the prompt that I picked was this one where I suspicioned that you sort of created it just to piss me off, which was a world where the magic is only existent in a form where it is directly tied to enchanted artifacts, items, which is my pet peeve, one of my pet peeves, because I'm a douche, and so I have many pet peeves. But one of them is stories that hinge on the pursuit, capture, and possession of an item. And so I set out to write a story about or containing these items that were enchanted with specific powers and so on and so forth. So, okay, so go ahead and share. If there's a passage that you want to share, go ahead and do that, and then I'll give a synopsis of the piece.
All right, let me wet my whistle so I don't run out.
Yes, for maximum Morgan Freeman level voiceover work.
All right, so again, unlike mine, I'm not starting at the first paragraph here. I actually am skipping ahead a little bit, but I thought this particular scene, again, I felt it was more poetic, so I keyed off of this and I really liked it. For a little bit of context, the person who's talking in this paragraph is your main protagonist, Mara. Mm-hmm. I think it's the same. Okay, so she felt the door open, or maybe she heard the collective intake of breath. It felt like the room had grown dry, as if you'd spark if you touched anything. The beams of sunlight coming in from the triangular panes of glass, organized like a peacock tail above the door, made it difficult to make out the face of the person standing in the doorway. But she could see the long gray hair, the slight, perhaps a bit bent posture, and the two long curved black daggers in the belt. The light reflected from those rose-shaped purple jewels that adorned the pommels. Mara had seen weapons like these in her school books when she was a little girl. Perhaps she imagined hearing whispers among the patrons in the common room. Blade hunter, she thought she heard them say.
Yes,
So,
I have always been a sucker for that construction where a character walks onto the stage and then you hear whispers of, oh, it's the king, you know, it's Aragorn. You know, that type of...
I really liked, in that particular passage, I just liked the picture you paint of the, you know, the person in silhouette and the I'm envisioning like, you know, the stained glass window above the door or something, casting the light down and putting her in silhouette, like the imagery and the sort of the way you took that trope and kind of made it your own. Fabulous. So, yeah, I thought it was worth sharing. And then why don't we tell me your synopsis here? What's the story?
So we went over what the prompt was, and so my approach was to structure the story based on the idea that there were all of these items that had been enchanted at some point in the past that I don't mention yet or discuss at all. But there are these items that exist, and the people who possess them I call, you know, the enchanted. And they're essentially a class. And the analog is to the American wealth system. And so I decided to take that premise, and then I thought, well, as we said in the last episode, I'm going to inject new weapons that have a different type of power into the story. And so the way that idea slightly changed was I presented a character that doesn't really have powers, or I haven't shown you any powers yet. But rather I created a different class of characters who show up to sort of step in and do a hyper version of the Robin Hood type situation, but it's more overt. So in this case, I have a representative of the Order of the Purple Rose come in and find one of these people who has an enchanted blade, who is also the town douchebag, and offer them the option of either relinquish the powerful artifact and return its power to the people, or I kill you and either destroy your weapon in the process of doing so, or then I forcibly take it and return it to the people. And I chose for that character, my instinct was to go with a traditional male, youthful, or 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, something, rugged type. I said the name already, so I'll use it again. Aragorn, Strider, that type of roguish character. But then I decided, fuck that. Let's inject some difference and some fun. And so I picked an aging 60-something woman. And for me, that was a... Go ahead.
I was going to say, you'll get a laugh out of this. I envisioned Zamzo, actually.
That is the basic...
Okay.
Yeah, precisely.
So
Zamzo was my my music theory teacher when I was a fresh college student. So, at the risk of being long-winded, the basic plot line is Mara, who is a bar server, a table clearer, waitress at a local inn, because I'm a cliche piece of shit, so my whole story takes place in an inn. She is sort of eavesdropping from a platform or a landing on a stairwell above the bar, which looks down on the common room, but where it's not impossible, but it's difficult and unlikely that really people could see her half as well as she can see them. That was the premise that I articulated at the beginning of the piece. And she's watching all of this happen. This character arrives, offers this ultimatum to the town douchebag who owns all the land around them. I reveal that the power of his weapon is that he can control the fertility of the soil. And so then the Order of the Purple Rose representative and this character, Big Luke, get into a back and forth philosophically about whether it's right or wrong for her to come and threaten him and murder him, take his weapon, and so on and so forth. And my anarchistic elements are present, no doubt. And the culmination is that obviously this character is not willing to relinquish his power, and so the 60-something-year-old woman kills him. And that, I think, is pretty straightforward. And the part that if I had to say, like, I'm proud of a part, it's this small bit of decision making. I decided to emulate the videos that accompanied Diablo 2. If you ever played that game and you remember, the premise was that Diablo was in the form of this sort of, or the Wanderer, I think he calls him, is this sort of speechless walking figure that the protagonist of the videos can't help, but he just follows. And so I'm changing a little bit, but I loved the idea of this mystique, this character of power, and then tell the story of this person who feels like this was the catalyst. This is what radicalizes Mara, is seeing this righteous murder of the public figure of oppression, and the sort of justice that comes when she unmasks him as valuing his ability to oppress other people over his own life, and seeing this woman in a man's world actually step forward and kill that person and take the power back and put it where it belongs, because immediately she relinquishes his weapon to another person who is supposed to then take it to the city council, etc. And so Mara gets up, quits her job, and follows this person out of the bar, and is where I leave off. She is chasing her down the road, and then comes around a corner, and I do the classic where the ninja style, where, oh, where is she? And then she's already standing there. I expected you to, I was wondering if you would follow me. I don't remember exactly what I said. And so that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary overall. I have to say, for me, and I don't know if this is a misread or what have you, I did get the you had talked about already including Deckard Cain, I think, yeah, essentially that idea. From
No, Deckard Cain wouldn't be a part of the.
No, I know. Anyway, the idea of you were talking about Diablo 2, this sort of person that you had already discussed here. I got that from it, but it had this really interesting kind of Western feel that I wasn't expecting from you. Not so exaggerated or cliche as like, they push open the door. This town ain't big enough for the both of us.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's there. It's totally.
It was a little bit, but it was it was good. I liked it. It was an interesting kind of connection for me when reading it, because as you pointed out, it almost all takes place in this little inn, in this little tavern, and my little exposure to fantasy, that's sort of a trope. A lot of times things start in the inn or the tavern, or blah blah. And so it's always, I think there could be a really interesting study where we could look at the ways that that's done. So as far as to avoid rambling, as far as like the process, as far as this experiment we're under, it's quite unlike a lot of the things you've written, but it definitely has your fingerprint on it, and I can tell that. I don't know if it's a result of having to force yourself to just get to the end as I did, but you definitely accomplished some things that you hadn't before.
Okay.
Like the language, as you put it, was easy to read. There were some good moments that stood out. There were, a few minor errors here and there. One line that I really liked was, I was trying to find it again. It's at the end. Here we go. You said, all he had to do was relinquish the crown, but kings never resign, not truly. Maybe they have to be killed to save the powerless and the poor they abuse. That line, for whatever reason, really stood out to me, and I think it kind of encapsulates what you were driving at through this whole chunk, this whole section. So my question, I guess, was there a driving philosophy to all of it? Or did you find that you were just kind of incorporating it as you went?
So, no, it was pretty overt. The colors of the woman, the black and purple, those are the colors of the anarcho-feminism flag. And so, yeah, I'm very overtly arguing for the abolishment of the state, the taking of the means of production by the workers. That's literally that's what our woman in black is orchestrating is the possibility for people to seize control of the means of production. So it's very socialist. It's very directly anarcho-feminist. And those were things I was thinking about as I was crafting the story. And full disclosure, it's also a reflection of some of our real life interactions with people. Certainly not all of the events that take place in the story, but some of the ideas that are put forward are ideas that I have been exposed to both academically and then in the real world. And so even though I think the presentation of those ideologies might be a little bit ham-fisted in this piece, I think that actually might be okay, because I was writing it with the assumption that the people who are reading fantasy may or may not have ever even heard of anything beyond just basic anarchism. So the likelihood that I'm going to have these readers go, oh, he's totally channeling anarcho-feminism here, blah, 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 I don't think that's going to happen. And so I guess I was trying to write a story where I articulate the way that I feel about political violence.
And for my money, I mean, obviously we talked a bit about it in our, off the camera and in our other shows and such. There was one part on page 4 where I just kind of circled a whole paragraph, and I wrote, I drew a hammer and a sickle next to it, and I said, A+, comrade.
Excellent.
Because it was just like, oh yeah, like I can see this philosophy at play.
Do you have that one handy?
Yeah, like I said, it was the top of page 4 here. It began with like, the woman cut him off. You sold the crops which are planted, tended, harvested, and she just sort of outlines the ways that.
Well, go ahead and just give us the quote. It's fine.
Give the whole paragraph. Okay.
Yeah.
The woman cut him off. You sold the crops which are planted, tended, harvested, processed, packaged, and delivered by the people of this region in order to fill your coffers. You exploit the labor of a large percentage of the working age people in this area, and you pay them almost nothing. Do they know the power of the artifact you carry, which was in no way earned by you, but given down by your rich father, who in his own time exploited and abused these people as you do now? I will tell them. It controls the fertility of the soil. You masquerade as a mere businessman and farmer who comes from a family of the same, but you wield an ill-gotten artifact that makes you the de facto king of this domain. You possess the off-switch to the fields. Even if the workers took the land from you or tried to buy you out, you could simply ruin them with the power of the magic contained in the artifact to starve them en masse. You are a despot and an abuser, and I am here to take the artifact from you and return its power to where it belongs, in the hands of those you believe will save you from me. I think underneath that, underlying it, it was, for me at least, obvious that you're sort of outlining, here's this corporatist shill type person who abuses the underclasses for their own profit, and what we need to have happen is a hero to come in and behead them and give the power back to the people and give the means of the production to the people and allow them to control their own fate.
Yeah, and if I can get a little bit more introspective about it, I also wanted to explore the idea that a lot of times when we think about violence, we only think about it in terms of what would be visceral, what would be in front of us. So a lot of times I would expect people to say, well, it's the most evil thing that was talked about in the story would be where this woman just steps forward and then just kills this person. But when you really think about it, was that actually an act of evil? When you consider how many people this character has abused and how many people he has killed by virtue of the choices that he makes in terms of wielding the power that he possesses. And I wanted to explore that and use the character of Mara to show that even though the action of what this woman in black does, even though that itself is by virtue of it being violent, it's abhorrent. But when a character like Mara is present, who understands the full context of what's going on, it radicalizes her, it activates her, it becomes an opportunity for her to step forward and try and grasp at a position higher up on sort of the social food chain from the position that she's in now.
And I know, at least, in some early, this is going to feel a bit like a non sequitur, but it's connected to what you're saying here. In some of the early classes you take in the bachelor's English program, they'll often look at various ways to analyze literature, various ways to talk about things, and we're always concerned with what is the perspective of the narrator, and they'll ask questions like, is it trustworthy or not, or yada yada. The thing that I thought was interesting here that you did is you provided a narrator who is an observer to this room, literally, to give us that voice of like, here's what's going on, and we're showing that scene. But then also, you don't always give us pretty much any of her direct thoughts other than a few quips here and there. And even still, I knew reading it, like, oh, she's become radicalized this. Like, she saw this thing that happened, and changed, and she chases after this woman. But we don't see that sort of a inner monologue going on in the narrator, where she's saying to herself things like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I saw this," right? You don't actually enunciate those things. The narrator maintains the sort of, here's what's going on, and you imply that conclusion, that radicalization. And I thought that was actually really interesting, because my temptation would have been to literally use the voice of the narrator to explain, I'm becoming radicalized.
Well, I think that's what most people would expect, is to be given the visceral reactions of the individual. But what I tried to do was show a spectrum where, sort of after the the slowed down clarity of the event itself, the actions of each sort of little person on the stage matters. So some people go and start trying to deal with the freshly made corpse, and the bar owner shows up and sort of adds a, what I was hoping was sort of a drawback to reality. Like, now time begins moving normally. He's pissed off. You have some of the people behind the bar are carrying on, and then the one reaction that is unexpected is the main character, Mara, who, contrary to what you would expect, I think, has a sort of very ideological and detached reaction to these events. I wanted to make it very clear that something about this strong, powerful older woman coming in and just fucking brutally owning this powerful male figure awakens something in Mara that allows her to just go to her boss and say, "Fuck you, I quit. I don't know where I'm getting my next meal. I've got my money pouch. I'm out the front door, and I'm gonna go see what I can see with this figure that I've decided to follow." We can talk in a minute about where this goes, but
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, overall for me, I think those were kind of the big points that we hit on there overall. But it was interesting compared to some of the things that you've written in the past. Yeah, I would say this is top 30%. We both really pulled through here and created something that I was surprised with in both sides.
cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, to reiterate it again. So it was a little different because it reads, the voice of it reads, like I said, unlike anything that you've ever done, in the sense that I think maybe in the past there was a lot more focus on the specific wording or trying to give it that sort of high fantasy language. Whereas here, I feel like you really relaxed more and you just kind of focused on the story and the meaning, and it reads better for that right now. I mean, not that you've never, there's not a place for the high voice or what have you. But
Right, and again, we're always on the caveat of, it's just, we're talking about our very small, narrow field of experience with mostly with each other's writing. And we've already been clear about that. We didn't really go to school for creative writing specifically, so there's not really any other way that we can do this if we're not going to be willing to say when we think something is good and when it's not. And if you're going to go along with the idea of the show and you've watched some of our other content, we tend to be pretty brutally honest. And I'm being genuine when I say that I was surprised at how good the products looked when we were able to force ourselves to just do it. So yeah. I'm going to hard cut here. We're going to take just a quick break. I'll just cut this out for all you guys watching. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about exactly what are we going to do for next week. Well, I think the best way to do it is keep with the, back and forth format that we've been doing. So let's start with your story. Where are you going to go from here? What are you going to write for me, for us, for the viewers, and me for next week? And what types of scenes are bouncing around in your head to cap this thing off?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to continue with Act 2, where she's in this office. We're going to see her basically get fired, I hope. And in her last moments, she's, gathering her stuff or whatever, she's going to try and enact this plan where she and Gavin are essentially going to try and bust him free and escape the institution. What exact form that's going to take, I'm not sure. I don't know quite what scenes will have to fill that in. But that's going to be sort of the thrust of Act 2, is this kind of a more of an action getaway. Like, we gotta fight the man, I don't know how many words that's going to take. Leading up to where I think it's going to be Act 3, the end of it is essentially they're going to succeed or they're not. So I think Act 2 is going to be... I think of it in Act 2, but ultimately I think the majority of the remaining 3,000 some odd words is going to be this part of the escape, and I want to see more of his development from a basic AI to his understanding of this is the, they're trying to make me into a weapon, and I won't do it. I'd rather die. I want to have that pulled in. I want to have some of these hooks from the beginning pulled in of this ideology of like, is he alive or not? Does it matter? I think I'd also like to see towards the end whether or not she's successful. I want to pull in some more of that culture of that, this god of the Idus of the flame or whatever I said. I liked that kind of ritualistic thing. And so I want to see if there's not anything else that will tie that into the end to kind of put bookends on it, as it were.
Okay, well, I mean, hardline. Does she succeed or not?
Right now, I want her to succeed. Yeah, I just don't know if that's going to make for the best story. And in my mind, when we were talking about brainstorming, I thought, for me, the implication is going to be there's going to be a moment where you think that Gavin is dead, and then it's going to end where you realize, oh no, he's fine and they escaped. I just don't know if I can pull it off. So I guess that's part of where I'm gonna struggle with going from here, is that I need to more explicitly outline this thing so that I can get to that moment.
Yeah, this is the treacherous week, for sure. The first big hurdle was, can we write the 3750 for the first week, or is it going to be a constant, excuses and bullshit? We passed the first test, but now I have trouble closing stories, and I know you do as well. So we're in totally uncharted. You could count on one hand the number of complete short stories I have that have been edited that have endings that make any kind of fucking sense. So,
and take that number and minus all your fingers, and that's about where I'm at.
Right. So I feel like you need to pick. So if you're going with a happy ending, I think you should, or if you're going with the ending where he's still alive, he exists, I think you need to choose. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise you're going to spend a huge amount of time creating ideas internally for both possibilities, and then you're going to pick one, and you're going to have wasted half of that time.
Yeah. Well, then let me pick now. I want the happy ending. Yes, please.
Okay. Well, and I like the idea of the second act is going to be them sort of hatching or enacting their plan. And do you know what the plan is, or are we still at the stage where you're just calling it like the plan?
Yeah, that's basically where I'm at, because so far I only have the two characters and like a vague outline of like, oh, they're in a factory.
Well, and are they going to meet armed resistance, or is it going to be more of they're fighting against the generalized enemy of the building that they're in, or whatever?
Yeah, I think I don't know for sure if it's going to be exactly armed. I was thinking more along the lines of like maybe like the security system locks down the building or something, and so now they're trying to figure out like specific quirks of the conflict of like, oh yeah, I wasn't expecting this door to be locked.
Right, they're locking it down, and maybe it's just a matter of time before officials arrive, and then they'll just wipe him out.
Yeah. And I might have shot myself in the foot a little bit, because that jump to the office, it sort of cuts out some other ideas I had. But I think in this second section, I'm going to do a little bit more jumping in time, as it were. By necessity, it can't be so linear. And so I think I'm going to have some flashbacks to moments where we see them figuring out, oh no, Gavin, like, you were meant to be a weapon, and he's going to have this sort of existential crisis of like, no, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't be that. And so I think that could be interesting. Otherwise, I don't know if I should try to push the beginning of it back and go in and insert something, or, that's where the outlining comes in for me, is I got to figure out.
My instinct is to like hard forbid you to go back and add more.
Yeah.
Like I mean, you laugh, but I mean, I do think that we should probably agree. I think that has to be like a cardinal rule with this process, is that we don't allow ourselves to overthink the first week of material and spend the second week just adding in extra shit or deleting and rewriting. That's not the goal here. We can talk about it, because that, for me, that's editing. That's revision that you're talking about, not writing.
And the funny thing is I was leaning that same way as well, because in my mind I'd already realized like, oh, like I'm already on video telling you like this is how this first part ends, and then to kind of start next week's recording at, well, I went back and I restarted, like that's not gonna
Yeah,
work.
I was gonna say it would also create continuity and logistical problems for how we would make these videos. So you're fucked. You're stuck with what you have.
Yeah.
Maybe down the line we could come up with some kind of a, you're allowed to go back X number, hundreds of words maximum, and rewrite. Like you can rewrite the last 2 paragraphs or something, just to make it so that you can get started. But what you were
And
talking about doing is no, you can't do it.
well, and I mean, and I think that's good because vaguely speaking, part one, I really wanted to develop that relationship between them. It's not perfect. It's not really exactly what I had in mind, but I like where it's at now.
Well, yeah, part 2, you need to show me the teeth. Show me the stakes. Show me
Yep.
what's going to happen if they enter a fail state. And then the last act, which can be very short, is where you give me the answer.
Yep, and the denouement of the resolution and so forth.
And so in the interest of time, since we're coming to the end here, it sounds to me like the big challenge narrative-wise is going to be the part where you have to decide what's their plan. What are they going to actually do on stage that you're calling their escape plan?
Yep.
And if you haven't come up with that, I don't actually have any good ideas on the top of my head. I think that's the hard part of this story, is you either have to come up with something clever, or you have to, or you have to find some way to be vague about it but have it not suck.
Yeah. And I already have some fun ideas that, of various types of scenes of conflicts they could have, of like, maybe she has to go through the factory floor at one point and all of the factory robots try to kill her. Like that could be interesting, but I don't know if that's a route I want to take or if there's guards or not. So it's all, for me, boiling down to there's some big decisions that have to be made, and then I need to essentially storyboard it to get us to that happy resolution of she escapes with Gavin. So
Yeah, and I guess that's where we're going to have to leave it for now, is to say that your second week of writing is going to mainly focus on trying to establish the stakes of the officials coming in and wiping out this AI that you are setting up as being quasi sentient, quasi human. And you have to figure out what the plan is that they execute to try and make their escape, and then I assume that probably in normal story fashion you will spend some time making it look like that plan is going to fail, and then in the end, whether by hook or by crook, the AI is going to survive with implications that I assume that we will discuss in the next episode when we're talking about the pieces as a whole.
yep.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good summary to me.
All right. Well, then let's cap this thing off. The night is getting late. I begin to tire, but I still have enough enthusiasm left to try and discuss real quickly what I'm gonna do with the second half of the thing that I have created. Because just like you, I'm now in the boat where I really heavily relied on the set piece of the inn, and then I threw that shit away at the halfway mark. So I no longer have my traditional cast of characters and set items and whatever. I don't have tables. I don't have the bartender. I don't have the atmosphere, or nobody's gonna come walking in through the door. I have to make up something else. Or I mean, I guess I could just have them at another inn later. But so I have almost no idea whatsoever what I'm going to do, and this is the typical way that I write, which is I have no idea where the story ends, and so a lot of times I just never get there. Or I'll get to a point where I'm just like, okay, it's 10,000 words, the story's over now.
Well, maybe I should push you similarly, and should you decide as a matter of course right now, like what is the end of this story?
Well, no, I'm trying to do that live here as we're recording. what I will say is when I think about the story and when I think about sitting and writing in this upcoming week, what I want to show is there's a moment in the narrative so far already where the woman in black makes the comment that essentially she knows that the imperial state is probably going to come in and kill her eventually, and the others from her order that are doing similar work, but that the spirit is kept alive, so to speak, of the anarchist feminist movement by the last few of these people retreating back to the south, where they train the next generation in hiding who will come and do this work. And so my thought was, what if I sort of alter their plans, so to speak, and have it be an unorthodox situation for the woman in black, where she finds someone who has no ties, who is pledged to the cause, and who wants to be her apprentice, but it's not in the safety of a secret fortress in the mountains protected by magical artifacts. It's in the field with an untrained partner who's following and asking inane questions and treating it more like a field trip than like a killing spree. So that was the loose framework that I have that I'm going forward, because I do see Mara as I'll out a little bit more of like my secret personal body of narrative ideas. The Mara is the person that I would consider to be the Lady of the Purple Rose in later other stories that I have written. And so I'm sort of trying to wedge this into an origin story of how does the greatest of these types of female leaders who challenge patriarchal authority, how does that person get created? And so I thought, well, what if it was this person who was radicalized by viewing someone making a stand and follows that person and observes and asks questions and you know, maybe I could come up with some way that she endears herself to the Lady in Black. Like maybe something occurs where Mara is able to use her non-fighting skills and non-knowledge to intercede and help in some way. But I don't know. I guess maybe that's where I was hoping you were gonna come in and be like, well, if that's what you want, then this is what you should do.
Yeah. So to me, the upcoming plot points that I can envision are things like, Mara and the Lady in Black. I don't know if you actually gave her a name yet.
I did not.
Okay. The Lady in Black has to decide, is it worth my time to even allow this person to follow me, or should I just murder her now to save myself the hassle? Is it worth the risk? Maybe you could show her inner monologue or through conversation, something along the lines of, I'm putting myself at risk by even entertaining the notion of training you, let alone taking on the actual risk of training you in the midst of these operations, as you said. But then also I'm envisioning, I want to see the Imperial response. Like maybe they get caught up in this Imperial response in some way. And so therein is your sort of conflict, your moment of possible failure, is where they both almost face impending death or almost get killed by the Imperial forces. And then do they escape or do they not? And in that context, I think the end of the story is probably something along the lines of the Lady in Black saying, very well, I'll take you on as my apprentice, but here are the rules. So it would be sort of an open-ended kind of, maybe Mara going, well, I don't know what I've got myself into now, but...
Maybe something as cheesy as trying to end the piece with like a scene where Mara is putting on a black cloak.
Yep.
Instead of the brown one that she grabs on the way out. Because if you haven't guessed it by now, I not only do I like good titles and tropey, kitschy, in stories and shit, I also love fucking color schemes and all kinds of other good nerdy shit. So, For
Okay,
me,
how does
that's
that
the type of shit in movies that gets me going. Is when like the apprentice sets down their old robes and puts on the and straps on the sword. And fucking that shit. I'm all into that shit.
Yeah. So it would be both an acceptance by the Lady in Black, but also the official taking up of the journey by Mara.
Well, one of the things I wanted to get across also in the second half of the story is the ease with which she dispatches Big Luke should be an indication that he was like a small fish. She just did it because it was appropriate to do so in the region, but the actual targets of this order would be people who not only have more powerful weapons than what this guy had, but know how to use them better, and who are themselves trained in combat, and who already know of the existence of the Order of the Purple Rose, etc. And so my thought was, and then you can yay or nay this, I thought maybe she follows the Lady in Black for a while, they go back and forth, maybe she witnesses another fight, or some other altercation, and then I'm thinking maybe something occurs where Mara could just cut her losses and leave, but she stays, and then she's the one that gets in trouble, not the Lady in Black. And then maybe the final sort of thing is like, well, is she just going to abandon Mara? And then I can show that she accepts her as an apprentice by virtue of the fact that the Lady in Black breaks her out, I guess, or saves her from the situation or whatever. And then I can go to this scene where she's saying, here's the real stakes, here's what's really going on, here's blah, blah, blah. And then I can show the she puts on the black. I guess there's your Game of Thrones reference. She takes the black.
Yeah, no, okay, so how's it, I'm gonna yay that, but how does this scene strike your fancy? One way or another, they come into contact with the Imperial forces. The Lady in Black, obviously, we get to see the fight of her where she escapes, but Mara, of course, doesn't have those skills, and she's actually captured. And you could preface this scene with some sort of thing like the Lady in Black could literally just say like, yeah, if you become a burden to me, like, bye, too fucking bad. Like, this is the risk you're accepting by staying with me. And so you could have it implied that in that moment when she gets captured, Mara is going to essentially give in and say like, yep, that was it. That was my whole adventure, and now I'm a prisoner of the Empire. Fuck. And then poof, Mara appears out of the shadows and kills them and rescues her. And that can be the moment of like, okay, fine, I'm taking you on as an apprentice, but
yeah, that's essentially kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a fun scene. I mean, obviously that's probably going to occur more towards the end of part 2 here, but
yeah.
Yeah, I want to read that.
Yeah, I mean, is it the most groundbreaking, clever thing I've ever heard? No, but that's not really the point here. I feel like if I push it, what we've said now, that I should be able to get over the finish line.
Yeah. I mean, as a gentle reminder, I guess, we're not after the next great American novel.
No.
I'm just after, like, can I even get to the end of a short story, let alone the next great American novel? Looking
forward to 3 or 4 or 6 months down. Excuse me. Looking to that amount of time, 3-6 months down the line, and being able to just have a handful of creative writing that's in a form that's like, here's 10 stories that I wrote. They're all different stories that have different characters and different ideas, and I've explored a dozen different worlds in the last 6 months that I made up with my buddy, and we taped it, and people can watch it and try the method and see what works for them. For me, that's very, very inspiring. It makes me willing to put myself in a position where next Thursday I might have to be getting ready for waking up at 7 a.m. again on Friday and fucking writing 3,000 words in one go. So,
yeah. I also look forward to, in the future, maybe we could even go so far as to codify the struggle in a realistic way. That's, oh, are you a struggling writer? Here's the system. And if we can discover a system that works for us by just sheer force of the accountability of our non-existent viewership, then awesome. But as you pointed out, if nothing else, we've got some stories now, and we got somewhere to go. So I look forward to next week, and I'm not looking forward to last minute procrastination. But if needs be, it's going to get done.
Yeah, hopefully we can both have a little bit more success. But in closing here, the situation is that we were able to write the 3,750 words, and generally we were both happy with what the other person had written and what we had ourselves written. And we have a general idea of how we're both going to close those pieces. And so next week, we will do another discussion similar to this one where we summarize what we've written, and we'll go over the stories as completed units. Because in this, even though you could write 10,000, 20,000 words in one story, we're sort of arbitrarily picking this amount to end it on. So we will both ideally have more discussion of our struggle to get the writing assignment done, but then we can talk about the whole pieces as units. And then at some point between now and then, we will have come up with whatever scheme we're going to come up with for how we're going to write the next story and go from there. So I hope you're enjoying this little journey that we're on. And, until we meet again, write well and hit that like and subscribe button and all that good stuff below.